"Hide in the trunk," Gerald whispered. And I swear, those 4 words on my son's wedding morning froze every cell in my body. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Our family driver of 15 years, the man my late husband trusted with his dying breath, was asking me to crouch in the back of a car like a fugitive while Cameron prepared to marry the woman he loved. The truth is, I should have seen the signs sooner, but betrayal has a way of wearing a beautiful mask, doesn't it? It smiles at you across the dinner table, laughs at your jokes, kisses your son goodnight, all while plotting to destroy everything you've built. I thought I was going to a wedding that morning. What I witnessed instead was a masterclass in deception so shocking, so perfectly executed, that even now, months later, I wake up in cold sweats wondering how many other lies I've swallowed without chewing. This is the story of how I discovered my future daughter-in-law was already married with a child, how she'd spent months researching our family like we were a business acquisition, and how one decision, one terrifying, humiliating choice to trust my instincts, saved my son from financial ruin and emotional annihilation. Before we dive in, I need you to understand something. What happened in that cathedral wasn't just drama. It was justice served cold in front of 300 witnesses, and the aftermath taught me more about revenge, dignity, and self-worth than any self-help book ever could. If you've ever felt that gut-wrenching sensation that something's wrong but couldn't prove it, if you've ever been backstabbed by someone you cheated yourself into trusting, then this story is for you. Comment below where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to choose between uncomfortable truth and comfortable lies, because what happened next didn't just change my son's life. It changed how I see the world. The secrets I uncovered that day, the lies that were exposed, the karma that finally caught up with a woman who thought she was untouchable. It all started with those 4 impossible words and a trunk that smelled like leather and gasoline, and the death of everything I thought I knew. The morning light barely touched my bedroom window when I heard the knock, soft, urgent, wrong for a wedding day. I was already dressed, my champagne-colored gown hanging like a ghost behind me, my hands trembling as I fastened my pearls. This should have been joy, pure and simple, but there was this knot in my chest, tight and cold, like my body knew something my mind refused to accept. I couldn't believe I was feeling dread on the day my only son, Cameron, was supposed to marry the woman he loved. But grief has a way of sharpening your instincts, and ever since I lost my husband, David, 2 years ago, I'd learned to trust that whisper in my gut, the one that screams when something's about to shatter. I opened the door to find Gerald, our family driver for nearly 15 years, standing there with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear mixed with determination, like a man about to break a sacred vow. "Mrs. Richardson," he said, his voice low and strained. "I need you to come with me right now. No questions. Please." My heart dropped into my stomach because Gerald wasn't the kind of man who asked for blind faith unless the world was tilting off its axis. He'd been David's closest confidant, the one who drove him to chemo appointments, the one who held my hand at the funeral when I thought I'd collapse. If Gerald was asking me to trust him on this morning of all mornings, then whatever he knew was serious enough to risk everything. "Gerald, what are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice cracking as I glanced toward Cameron's old bedroom down the hall. "The ceremony starts in 3 hours. I have to finish getting ready. I have to—" But he cut me off with a shake of his head, his gray eyes pleading with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Your husband made me promise something before he died," Gerald said, and those words hit me like a freight train. He made me swear that if I ever saw danger coming for Cameron, I'd protect him no matter what. "Mrs. Richardson, that danger is here. Today. And if you don't come with me right now, your son is going to walk into a trap that will destroy him." The air left my lungs in a rush, and suddenly I was back in that hospital room, watching David's chest rise and fall for the last time, hearing him whisper, "Take care of our boy." The memory was so vivid I could smell the antiseptic, feel the cold metal of the bed rail under my palm. Gerald had been there that night too, standing in the corner like a sentinel, and now he was invoking that sacred moment, that final promise. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to call Cameron and warn him. But something in Gerald's face told me that whatever this was, it required stealth, silence, and the kind of courage that only comes when you're willing to break your own heart to save someone else's. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper as I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly button it. Gerald didn't answer right away. He just led me down the back staircase, through the kitchen, and out into the cold morning air where his black sedan sat idling in the driveway. The engine purred like a predator waiting to pounce, and when he opened the back door, I saw he'd already cleared out the usual clutter. No briefcases, no umbrellas, just an empty space that felt ominous. "I need you to get in the trunk," he said, and the world tilted sideways. I must have looked at him like he'd lost his mind because he quickly added, "It's the only way. If Cameron knows, he'll confront her, and she'll vanish before we get proof. She's been controlling the narrative for months. We only get one clean look at her real life." My mind was racing, 1,000 questions colliding like freight trains, but all I could manage was a strangled, "Catch who?" Gerald's jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something beyond fear in his eyes. I saw rage, the kind of cold, calculated fury that comes from watching someone you care about walk toward a cliff. "The woman he's about to marry," Gerald said quietly, and those 6 words detonated in my chest like a bomb. "She's not who she says she is, Mrs. Richardson. And if we don't stop this wedding, she's going to take everything, the money, the estate, the legacy your husband built, and disappear. But I need proof. I need you to see it with your own eyes, because when we expose her, there can't be any doubt." The knot in my chest pulled tighter, and I realized with horrifying clarity that I was about to climb into the trunk of a car and spy on my own son. All because the truth was too dangerous to confront head-on. I climbed into that trunk like I was climbing into my own grave, the leather cold against my back, the smell of oil and rubber filling my nostrils as Gerald gently closed the lid, leaving just a crack of light. "I'll get you out the second we arrive," he promised, his voice muffled through the metal. And then the car was moving, rolling down the driveway and onto the main road. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib, and I had to focus on breathing, in through my nose, out through my mouth, just to keep from screaming. This was insane, reckless, the kind of thing you see in movies and think, that would never happen to me. But here I was, a grown woman, a widow, a mother, curled up in the dark while my son's wedding day unfolded around me like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I could hear Gerald's voice through the seat, calm and steady, as he made small talk about the weather, the traffic, the usual pleasantries that meant absolutely nothing in the face of what we were about to do. Then I heard another voice, Cameron's, and my whole body went rigid. "Morning, Gerald," my son said, his tone light, almost giddy, the way he used to sound on Christmas morning when he was a kid. "Big day, huh? I can't believe I'm actually getting married. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and realize it's all a dream." The innocence in his voice broke something inside me, because I knew what he didn't, that this dream was about to turn into a waking nightmare, and I was the one who was going to shatter it. Gerald kept his composure, playing the role of the loyal driver to perfection, and I could hear the faint rustle of Cameron settling into the back seat, probably checking his phone, maybe texting Isabel, the woman he thought he knew. Then Cameron's phone rang, and the mood shifted instantly. "Hey, babe," he answered. But there was a tension in his voice that hadn't been there a moment ago, like he was bracing for impact. I couldn't hear Isabel's side of the conversation, but Cameron's responses were clipped, careful, the way you talk when you're hiding something. "No, I'm on my way now. Yes, everything's fine. I'll see you at the church, okay?" When he hung up, there was a long silence, and then his phone rang again. A different ringtone, sharp and insistent, like an alarm going off. "Not now," Cameron muttered under his breath, and I heard him reject the call, but it rang again immediately, the same unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. I couldn't see it, but I could feel his panic through the seat, the way his breathing quickened, the way his foot tapped nervously against the floor. "Who keeps calling you?" Gerald asked, his tone casual, but I knew he was probing, gathering information, and Cameron's laugh was hollow, forced. "Just some spam caller," he said, but his voice cracked on the word spam. It wasn't guilt in his voice, it was stress, the kind that comes when 100 wedding day details collide. The phone rang a third time, and this time Cameron powered it off completely. And in that moment, I realized we were no longer just going to a wedding. We were driving straight into the heart of a betrayal so deep, it had already started to consume my son from the inside out. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of Cameron shifting in his seat, and I wondered what kind of secrets a man carries on his wedding day. What kind of lies does he tell himself to justify marrying someone who might be using him? I thought about David, about how he used to say, "Trust your gut, Eleanor. It's the one thing that never lies." And my gut was screaming now, louder than ever, telling me that Isabel wasn't just a gold digger or a social climber. She was something far more dangerous. She was a predator, and my son was the prey. And if we didn't act fast, she'd devour everything we'd worked so hard to build. Gerald caught my eye in the rearview mirror, or at least he glanced toward the trunk. A silent acknowledgement that I was still there, still breathing, still holding on by a thread. "Change of plans," he said to Cameron, his voice smooth as silk. "Miss Isabel just texted. She needs you to pick her up at a different address, something about a last-minute errand with her mother." I could hear the confusion in Cameron's voice when he responded, "What? But I thought she was already at the church with the bridesmaids." Cameron glanced at his phone. "She did text. Weird." Gerald didn't miss a beat. "We'll head there now." And just like that, we veered off course, away from the church, away from the carefully planned timeline, and toward whatever truth Gerald had been chasing all morning. The car slowed to a crawl, and I could feel us turning onto a rougher road, the kind with potholes and uneven pavement that rattled my bones with every bump. This wasn't the manicured driveway of a country club, or the smooth asphalt of a church parking lot. This was somewhere else. Somewhere Isabel had kept hidden, and my pulse quickened as I tried to imagine what kind of place we were heading toward. Through the crack in the trunk, I caught glimpses of neighborhood. Modest houses with peeling paint, chain-link fences, yards cluttered with old toys and rusted bikes. This wasn't Isabel's world, or at least not the world she'd shown us. And the dissonance between what I was seeing and what I thought I knew made my stomach churn with a sickening sense of dread. Gerald parked the car with deliberate care, positioning it so that the trunk faced a small, unremarkable house with faded blue siding and a mailbox that read Mitchell in crooked letters. I could hear Cameron's door open, his footsteps crunching on gravel as he walked toward the front porch, probably confused, maybe annoyed, but still trusting that this was all part of some harmless wedding day chaos. Gerald waited until Cameron was out of earshot, then popped the trunk just enough for me to sit up, my muscles screaming in protest as I shifted from my cramped position. "Look through that gap," he whispered, pointing toward the house, and I pressed my face against the narrow opening, my heart hammering as I tried to focus on what I was supposed to see. The front door opened, and there she was, Isabel. But not the Isabel I knew. Gone was the polished, elegant woman who'd charmed her way into charity galas and country club brunches, the one who always wore designer dresses and spoke in that refined, honeyed tone that made everyone feel like they were in the presence of royalty. This Isabel was barefoot, wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face scrubbed clean of the makeup that usually made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. She looked ordinary, real. And somehow, that made everything so much worse, because it meant the woman my son loved was a performance, a carefully constructed lie designed to infiltrate our lives and extract everything of value. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A little girl, 5 years old, with dark curls and bright eyes, came running out of the house, her tiny arms outstretched as she called out, "Mommy! Mommy! You're home!" The word hit me like a sledgehammer, and I watched, paralyzed with horror, as Isabel scooped the child up into her arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead with a tenderness I'd never seen her show Cameron. "Hey, sweetheart," Isabel cooed, her voice soft and genuine in a way that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "Mommy has to go soon, but I'll be back before bedtime, okay?" The little girl nodded, clinging to her mother's neck, and then a man appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of rugged, working-class look that screamed stability and normalcy. "Brett," Isabel called over her shoulder, her tone casual, familiar, like they'd had this conversation 1,000 times before. "Can you make sure Lily gets her lunch, and don't forget her ballet class at 3. The man, Brett Mitchell I assumed, nodded, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching Isabel with a mixture of affection and exasperation that only comes from years of shared history. "Yeah, I got it," he said, and then his eyes flicked toward the street, toward our car, and I saw something shift in his expression. Suspicion, maybe, or recognition. Isabel followed his gaze, and for a split second, I thought we'd been caught, that she'd see us and everything would explode right there on the front lawn. But Cameron chose that moment to step into view, his face a mask of confusion, and Isabel's entire demeanor changed in an instant. She handed Lily to Brett with a quick, almost dismissive gesture, then plastered on that megawatt smile I'd come to associate with her public persona, the one that said, "I'm perfect. I'm harmless. I'm exactly what you think I am." But I'd just seen the truth, the real Isabel, the one with a husband and a daughter and a life she'd been hiding from my son. And as she walked toward Cameron, her voice dripping with false sweetness, I realized we weren't just dealing with infidelity or betrayal. We were dealing with something far more calculated, far more dangerous. And the question wasn't whether we could stop this wedding. The question was whether we could stop it in time to save Cameron from a trap that had been set long before he ever said, "I love you." Gerald moved with the precision of a man who'd done surveillance work in a past life, sliding out of the driver's seat and approaching Brett Mitchell with a calm authority that made it clear this wasn't a social call. I watched from my hidden vantage point as Gerald introduced himself, his voice low and steady, while Brett's expression shifted from confusion to alarm, to something darker, anger maybe, or the kind of fear that comes from knowing your secrets are about to be dragged into the light. Cameron was still talking to Isabel near the porch, oblivious to the conversation unfolding just a few yards away, and I wanted to scream, to run to him and shake him until he saw what I was seeing. But I stayed frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the trunk, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I watched my son's world begin to crumble. Brett pulled a folder from inside the house, thick with papers, and handed it to Gerald with a grim determination that told me this wasn't the first time he'd had to prove his wife's duplicity. I couldn't hear their exact words, but I saw Gerald flip through the documents, his jaw tightening with each page. A marriage certificate, dated 4 years ago, listing Isabel Ann Mitchell as Brett's legal wife. Photos followed, dozens of them, showing Isabel and Brett at a beach, at a birthday party, holding hands in front of a Christmas tree with Lily perched between them. Then came the text messages, screenshots of conversations between Isabel and someone named Vanessa, discussing the Richardson fortune and how to secure access to the Richardson estate before the old lady catches on. And finally, printed Google searches: David Richardson net worth, Cameron Richardson trust fund, how to contest a will, each one time-stamped and dated, a digital trail of premeditated fraud that made my stomach turn. "She told me she was going to leave me," Brett said, his voice loud enough now that I could catch fragments through the open trunk. "Said she'd found a better opportunity, that this Cameron guy was her ticket out. But she promised Lily would be taken care of, that she'd send money once she got access to the estate." Gerald's response was cold, clinical, the voice of someone who'd seen too much betrayal to be shocked anymore. "And you believed her?" Brett's laugh was bitter, broken. "What choice did I have? She's Lily's mother. I thought maybe if I let her go, she'd come back once she realized the grass isn't greener. But then I started getting calls from some guy named Randall Turner, saying he knew about the scam, that he wanted a cut, or he'd blow the whole thing up. He threatened Lily, said if Isabel didn't pay him off, he'd make sure we all went down. The name Randall Turner sent a chill down my spine, because it added a layer of danger I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about money or betrayal anymore. It was about a hustler, an extortionist, a small-time predator, the kind of mess that gets people hurt or worse. I could see Gerald processing this information, his mind working through the logistics of what we'd need to do next, and I knew we were past the point of no return. This wasn't something we could handle quietly, with lawyers and mediators and polite conversations over tea. This required exposure, justice, the kind of public reckoning that would leave scars on everyone involved, including Cameron. But what was the alternative? Let my son marry a woman who was already married, who had a child she'd abandoned emotionally if not physically, who was planning to rob him blind and disappear into the night. Gerald turned back toward the car, his face set in grim resolve, and I knew what he was going to say before he said it. By the time Brett handed over the folder, nearly an hour was gone. Mrs. Richardson, we're taking Brett and Lily to the church. We have 2 hours before the ceremony starts, and we need to present this evidence in a way that leaves no room for doubt. I wanted to argue, to find some other solution that didn't involve humiliating my son in front of 300 guests. But the truth was, there was no other way. Isabel had built her con too carefully, too thoroughly, and the only way to dismantle it was to bring the entire house of cards crashing down in one spectacular public collapse. She counted on our world, our manners, our trust, to keep anyone from checking. Brett hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the house where Lily was still playing, blissfully unaware that her mother's crimes were about to become front-page news. "What about my daughter?" Brett asked, and for the first time, I heard genuine anguish in his voice. The kind that comes from loving someone more than your own life, and knowing you're about to put them through hell to save them. Gerald's expression softened, just a fraction, and he placed a hand on Brett's shoulder. "Your daughter deserves to know the truth about her mother, and she deserves to be protected from whatever Randall Turner is planning. Bringing her to the church, with documentation and witnesses, is the safest thing you can do." Brett's shoulders sagged, and he nodded slowly, like a man accepting his fate. And as he turned to go back inside and collect Lily, I realized that we were all about to walk into a firestorm, one that would consume Isabel's lies, yes, but also burn through the fragile hope that Cameron had built his future on. The cathedral loomed like a monument to everything we were about to destroy. Stone arches reaching toward heaven, stained glass windows filtering sunlight into kaleidoscopes of red and gold, pews filled with people dressed in their finest, whispering and laughing and completely unaware that they were about to witness a wedding turn into a war zone. I'd climbed out of the trunk in the church parking lot, my legs shaky, my dress wrinkled, my carefully applied makeup smudged from sweat and tears I hadn't realized I'd cried. Gerald had already briefed an officer and arranged for them to be nearby the moment proof surfaced. He positioned Brett and Lily in a side room, away from prying eyes, while he briefed the security team on what was about to happen, making sure we had backup in case things went sideways. And all the while, I stood in the narthex, watching Cameron greet guests with that beautiful, oblivious smile, and I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces because I knew I was about to take that smile away forever. Isabel arrived like a queen making her grand entrance, stepping out of a white limousine with her bridesmaids trailing behind her like ladies in waiting, all of them giggling and snapping photos for social media. She was breathtaking in her wedding gown, ivory lace, off-the-shoulder sleeves, a train that seemed to go on for miles. And for a moment, I almost believed the illusion. Almost believed that she was the perfect bride, the woman who would love my son and honor the legacy David had left behind. But then I caught her checking her phone, her expression hardening for just a second as she typed something quickly before slipping the device into her bouquet. I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. I knew she was probably texting Brett or Vanessa or maybe even Randall Turner, coordinating the next phase of whatever scheme she was running. The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from a society wedding. Organ music swelling, guests rising to their feet, Cameron standing at the altar looking like he might pass out from sheer joy. I took my seat in the front row, right next to where David should have been, and I felt his absence like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. "Help me do this," I whispered to the empty space beside me, to the ghost of the man who'd taught me to fight for what mattered. "Help me protect our boy." The Reverend began his opening remarks, welcoming everyone and talking about the sanctity of marriage, the importance of truth and trust, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing hysterically at the irony. Truth and trust, the very things Isabel had weaponized, twisted, destroyed in her quest for money and status. I watched Isabel take her place at the altar, her hand slipping into Cameron's, and I saw the way he looked at her, like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, the solution to every problem he'd ever faced. And I thought about how love makes us blind, how it turns us into fools willing to ignore red flags and dismiss our instincts because we want so desperately to believe in something good. I'd been there once with David, except David had been real, honest, worthy of that blind faith. Isabel was none of those things, and as the Reverend droned on about vows and commitment, I caught her glancing toward the exit, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was calculating escape routes. She knew something was wrong. Maybe she'd seen Brett's car in the parking lot, maybe Randall had tipped her off, or maybe she just had that sixth sense that predators develop when they're about to be cornered. The moment arrived faster than I expected, the Reverend's voice cutting through my spiraling thoughts with the words that would change everything. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed was deafening, every guest holding their breath, waiting for the formality to pass so the ceremony could continue. But I didn't let it pass. I stood up, my legs trembling, my voice cracking as I said the 4 words that would detonate my son's life. "I object to this." The collective gasp that rippled through the cathedral sounded like a wave crashing against rocks, and I felt 300 pairs of eyes turn toward me, their expressions ranging from shock to confusion to outright scandal. Cameron's face went white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, and Isabel's mask finally slipped, her eyes narrowing with a cold fury that confirmed every suspicion I'd had. "Mother, what are you doing?" Cameron's voice was barely above a whisper, but I heard the betrayal in it, the disbelief, and I knew that no matter what happened next, our relationship would never be the same. But I'd made a choice the moment I climbed into that trunk. I'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over peace, and I wasn't backing down now. "I'm sorry, Cameron," I said, my voice stronger now, steadier, as I looked him straight in the eye. "But Isabel is already married. She has a husband named Brett Mitchell and a 5-year-old daughter named Lily, and she's been planning to defraud this family since the day she met you." The words hung in the air like smoke from a bomb, and then Gerald opened the side door, and Brett walked in carrying Lily, the little girl's eyes wide with confusion as she took in the crowd, the flowers, the woman in the white dress who looked like a stranger. Lily's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk, high, clear, innocent, as she pointed at Isabel and said the word that would bury any remaining doubt. "Mommy." It was such a simple word, one that children say 1,000 times a day. But in that moment, in that cathedral packed with witnesses, it carried the weight of absolute, undeniable truth. Isabel's face went from shock to panic to rage in the span of a heartbeat, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like a sandcastle hit by a wave, and I watched her mouth open, probably to deny it, to spin some lie that would explain away the unexplainable. But before she could speak, Brett stepped forward, his expression grim, and pulled the folder from his jacket. The same folder Gerald had shown me, now thick with documentation, photos, text messages, all the proof we'd need to bury her story before it even began. "Her real name is Isabel Ann Mitchell," Brett said, his voice steady despite the tremor I could see in his hands. We've been married for 4 years, legally, and Lily is our daughter. I have the marriage certificate, birth certificate, joint tax returns, mortgage documents, everything you need to confirm that she's been lying to all of you." He handed the folder to the Reverend, who looked like he'd just been asked to perform an exorcism. And then Brett turned to Cameron, his expression softening with something that looked almost like pity. "I'm sorry, man. I really am. I didn't want to believe it either when she told me her plan, but she's been researching your family for months, looking for ways to get access to your money. She told me she'd leave me, take Lily, start a new life. But then Randall Turner got involved, started threatening us, and I realized this whole thing was going to explode whether I wanted it to or not." Cameron stood frozen at the altar, his face a mask of devastation, and I could see him trying to process what he was hearing, trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the stranger being described in front of 300 people. Isabel finally found her voice, and it came out sharp, defensive, desperate. "This is insane," she hissed, her eyes darting between Brett, me, Gerald, and the crowd. "I don't know who this man is, but he's clearly lying. Someone put him up to this. Probably you, Eleanor. Because you've never liked me? You've never thought I was good enough for your precious son." Her words dripped with venom, and for a moment, I almost admired the sheer audacity it took to try and gaslight an entire church full of people when the evidence was literally being passed around the front pews. But then Lily wriggled out of Brett's arms and ran toward Isabel, her little face scrunched up in confusion as she tugged on her mother's dress. "Mommy, why are you wearing that pretty dress? Are we going to a party?" The question was so pure, so heartbreakingly innocent, that it sucked all the air out of the room, and I saw several guests cover their mouths in shock, their eyes welling with tears at the cruelty of what they were witnessing. Isabel looked down at Lily like she was a bomb about to detonate, and for a split second, I saw something almost human flicker across her face. Regret, maybe, or shame, or the realization that she'd just lost everything. But then the mask came back up, and she grabbed Lily's hand, her grip tight enough to make the child wince, and turned toward the exit like she was going to bolt. That's when the police arrived, their presence announced by the sound of heavy boots on marble floors and the crackle of radios echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Gerald had called them ahead of time, briefing them on the situation, and now 2 officers stood blocking the doors, their expressions neutral but their hands resting on their belts in a way that made it clear they weren't here to negotiate. "Isabel Mitchell," one of them said, his voice calm but firm. "We need you to come with us. You're under arrest on suspicion of fraud, attempted bigamy, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warning filled the cathedral like a prayer, and I watched Isabel's face cycle through denial, rage, and finally, resignation, as she realized there was no way out, no clever lie that would save her this time. Cameron finally moved, stumbling forward like a man waking from a nightmare, his eyes locked on Isabel as the officers gently took Lily from her arms and handed the child back to Brett. "Is it true?" Cameron's voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the silence like a gunshot. "All of it? The marriage? The daughter? The plan to steal from us?" Isabel didn't answer, just stared at him with cold, empty eyes. And in that moment, I knew my son was seeing her for the first time. Not the woman he'd fallen in love with, but the predator who'd been hunting him all along. The officers led her away in handcuffs, her white dress dragging behind her like a funeral shroud. And as the cathedral doors swung shut, I heard someone in the back pew whisper, "What the hell just happened?" It was a question I'd be asking myself for months to come, even as I held Cameron while he wept, even as I watched the life we'd known disintegrate into ash and memory. The days after the wedding, that wasn't blurred together like a fever dream, each one bleeding into the next in a haze of police interviews, legal consultations, and the kind of suffocating silence that settles over a house when grief has nowhere to go. Cameron locked himself in his room for the first 48 hours, refusing to eat, refusing to talk, just staring at the wall like he could find answers in the peeling paint if he looked hard enough. For weeks, Cameron couldn't look at me without flinching, like my voice had become the sound of his worst day. I sat outside his door more times than I can count, my hand pressed against the wood, willing him to let me in, to let me carry some of the weight crushing down on his shoulders. But healing doesn't work on anyone's timeline but its own, and all I could do was wait, and pray, and trust that he'd eventually find his way back to the surface. Gerald became a fixture in our house during those weeks, his loyalty extending far beyond his job description as he helped coordinate with the attorneys, fielded calls from nosy reporters, and made sure Cameron ate at least one meal a day, even if it meant sitting outside his door with a tray until he gave in. I watched this man, this quiet, steady presence who'd driven us to school recitals and business meetings and funerals, transform into something more like family. And one night, after Cameron had finally fallen asleep, I pulled Gerald aside and thanked him for keeping David's promise. "You saved our son," I told him, my voice breaking on the words. "You risked everything to protect him, and I don't know how to repay that." Gerald just shook his head, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Richardson. David was my brother in every way that mattered, and Cameron is like a nephew to me. This is what family does." The police investigation moved faster than I expected, partly because Isabel had left such an obvious trail of evidence, and partly because Randall Turner turned out to be a small-time con artist who flipped on her the second he was arrested. He'd coached her and helped build the playbook, and Isabel had done her own digging too, leaving a trail of searches and messages we could finally prove. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Every sweet word, every shared laugh, every intimate moment had been calculated, rehearsed, part of a performance designed to extract maximum value before disappearing. Cameron learned all of this in bits and pieces, through depositions and court filings, and I watched each new revelation chip away at his ability to trust, to hope, to believe that love could be anything other than a weapon used against him. 3 months after the cathedral incident, Cameron finally agreed to see a therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, who specialized in trauma and betrayal. I drove him to his first appointment, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel as I tried to think of something comforting to say, some wisdom that would make this easier. But there was nothing, so I just walked him to the door, kissed his forehead like I used to when he was a little boy afraid of monsters under the bed, and told him I'd be waiting when he was done. When he came out an hour later, his eyes were red, but there was something different in his posture. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the beginning of acceptance, the understanding that he'd been victimized by someone who was very, very good at what she did. The legal consequences for Isabel were severe: 18 months in prison for fraud and attempted bigamy, plus restitution for the money she'd already extracted from Cameron during their engagement. Designer clothes, jewelry, a down payment on a condo she claimed was for us. Brett filed for divorce immediately, citing abandonment and emotional abuse, and was awarded full custody of Lily, who was too young to understand why Mommy had gone away, but old enough to feel the absence like a missing tooth. I thought about that little girl sometimes, wondered what kind of scars she'd carry, what stories she'd tell herself about her mother, and I felt a strange kinship with her, both of us collateral damage in Isabel's war against the world. By the time summer rolled around, Cameron had started to rebuild, slowly, carefully, like a man learning to walk again after a devastating accident. He'd rejoined the board of his father's company, started seeing friends again, even went on a few dates, though I could tell he was guarded in a way he'd never been before. Gerald had officially become part of our inner circle, joining us for Sunday dinners and holidays. His presence a reminder that loyalty still existed, that not everyone was a liar waiting to strike. And me? I'd learned to trust my instincts again, to listen when that voice in my gut whispered danger. Because the truth, no matter how painful, was always better than the prettiest lie. We'd survived, scarred but standing. And if David could see us now, I hoped he'd be proud of the family we'd fought so hard to protect. The moral of this story settled over me like dust after a storm. Quiet, unavoidable, impossible to ignore. I'd learned that intuition isn't paranoia, that the tightness in your chest when something feels wrong is your soul trying to protect you from dangers your mind hasn't processed yet. I'd learned that betrayal doesn't always announce itself with villainous monologues and obvious red flags. Sometimes it walks into your life wearing a beautiful smile and telling you exactly what you want to hear, and by the time you realize you've been backstabbed, the damage is already done. I'd learned that justice, real justice, requires courage, the kind that makes you climb into a trunk on your son's wedding day, the kind that forces you to stand up in a cathedral and destroy the illusion of happiness because the truth matters more than comfort. Cameron's healing journey taught me something else, something I hadn't expected, that reclaiming your self-worth after someone has shamed and humiliated you isn't a single moment of revelation. It's 1,000 small choices to believe you deserved better, to trust again despite the scars, to refuse to let someone else's cruelty define your capacity for love. I watched my son rebuild his dignity one therapy session at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one day at a time when he chose to get out of bed and face a world that had proven itself capable of profound deception. And I realized that vengeance isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's simply about refusing to be silenced, about exposing the truth so that the person who hurt you can't hurt anyone else, about turning your pain into protection for the next potential victim. The story of Isabel Mitchell became a cautionary tale in our social circles, whispered about at charity events and dinner parties, a reminder that appearances can deceive, that background checks matter, that love without verification is just hope dressed up in wedding clothes. But for Cameron and me, it became something more personal, a pivot point, a before and after moment that divided our lives into the time when we were naive enough to take people at face value, and the time after we learned to question, to verify, to protect ourselves without apology. The revenge we'd exacted wasn't petty or cruel. It was necessary, a form of self-defense that had saved us from financial ruin and emotional devastation that would have rippled through generations. I found myself thinking about David more during those months of recovery, imagining what he would have said about the whole ordeal. He'd always been the one to trust but verify, to extend kindness while keeping one eye on the exits. And I realized that Gerald had carried out David's final directive with precision and love, protecting Cameron even when it meant shattering his world. Because sometimes the most merciful thing you can do for someone you love is destroy the lie before it destroys them. That's the kind of payback that matters, not the vindictive kind that seeks to wound for the sake of wounding, but the protective kind that says, I love you too much to let you walk into this trap, even if it means you'll hate me for a while. The courtroom had given us legal justice, Isabel behind bars, restitution paid, a public record that would follow her forever. But the deeper justice, the kind that actually heals, came from Cameron's slow return to himself, his willingness to seek help, his determination not to let this betrayal turn him into someone bitter and closed off. I watched him choose hope again, carefully, skeptically, but still choosing it. And I knew that was the real victory. Karma had come for Isabel in the form of handcuffs and a prison sentence, but it came for us in the form of second chances and hard-won wisdom, and I'd take that trade every single time. Looking back, I understood that the morning I climbed into that trunk marked the beginning of a different kind of life, one where I stopped apologizing for my instincts, where I stopped letting social niceties override my responsibility to protect my family, where I embraced the uncomfortable truth that sometimes you have to be willing to burn down the illusion to save what's real. We'd walked through fire, Cameron and I, and we'd come out the other side still standing, still fighting, still committed to the idea that truth and family and dignity were worth defending, even when the cost was steep. And if that's not justice, I don't know what is, because at the end of the day, we reclaimed our lives from someone who'd tried to steal them, and we did it by refusing to look away from what was right in front of us, no matter how much it hurt to see it clearly. So now I'm turning to you, because I know I'm not the only one who's lived through a betrayal like this, who's had to make the impossible choice between protecting someone you love and protecting their feelings. Have you ever had that moment where you absolutely knew that something was wrong, but everyone around you was telling you to ignore it, to trust, to have faith? Did you listen to your gut, Or did you silence it because the truth was too uncomfortable? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I genuinely want to know. What would you have done if you were in my position that morning? Would you have climbed into that trunk, risked humiliating your son in front of everyone he knows, destroyed his wedding day to save his future? Or would you have stayed silent, hoping it would all work out, praying that your instincts were wrong? Here's the thing I've learned through all of this. Family drama, especially the kind rooted in infidelity and deception, doesn't just wound the people directly involved. It sends shockwaves through everyone who cares about them. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is become the villain in someone's story so they don't end up the victim in someone else's con. If Cameron had married Isabel that day, we'd be telling a very different story right now. One that probably ends with bankruptcy, a bitter divorce, and years of legal battles that would have shattered what was left of our family. Instead, we got justice. We got truth. And yeah, we got our share of public humiliation and whispered gossip. But we also got our dignity back, our self-worth, and most importantly, we got a chance to reclaim our lives from someone who thought we were just another paycheck waiting to be cashed. I want to hear about the moments that tested you, the times when you had to choose between being liked and being right, between keeping the peace and protecting what matters. Tell me in the comments, have you ever exposed someone's lies, even when it cost you relationships? Have you ever had to watch someone you love get cheated, lied to, backstabbed, and had to decide whether to intervene or let them learn the hard way? What was your moment of reckoning, and how did you handle the aftermath? Because here's what I'm realizing months after that cathedral showdown. Revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's just about refusing to be complicit in your own. Destruction and payback doesn't have to be cruel. It can simply be the act of standing up and saying, "No, this stops here, and it stops now." If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships, your own instincts, your own moments of shocking revelation, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I'm not done sharing the lessons I've learned from this nightmare. We're going to dive deeper into how to spot red flags before they become catastrophes, how to rebuild trust after it's been obliterated, how to support someone you love when their world has been turned upside down by someone else's vengeance against truth. This channel is about more than just storytelling. It's about equipping you with the tools to protect yourself and your family from the kind of betrayal that doesn't just wound, it destroys. So subscribe, stick around, and let's navigate these murky waters together. Because if my experience taught me anything, it's that we're stronger when we share our scars and learn from each other's battles.